On this 38th episode of the Sports in the Making podcast, one of the most impactful people in sports broadcasting joins me, Jed Drake. Jed started with ESPN in 1980, a year after the sports network launched, and he has an astounding 92 Sports Emmy Award nominations. Yes, you heard that right, 92. And in his possession, 16 Emmy Awards for innovative technical achievement, FIFA World Cup coverage, live special and music composition and direction, and many others. Jed has been a major factor in implementing much of the technology you see on sports broadcasts, including the digital 1st and 10 yellow line on football games and the K-zone that's prevalent on baseball broadcasts. I got to see firsthand some of those innovations put in action in my time at ESPN. As Senior Vice President and Executive Producer of Remote Production, Jed oversaw every event at the worldwide leader in sports for many years. He shares some amazing insight and stories with me on how those innovations happened. We talk about how technology was used to enhance the viewer experience, what he's doing now working with technology companies C360 and Cosm to use data to tell stories, and his best prediction on where technology is heading for live sports. It's all next on Sports in the Making. This episode has visuals, so if you're listening, be sure to subscribe to the Sports in the Making YouTube channel at Sports Making to see some of what we discussed. One of the most influential people that has ever existed in sports, certainly with ESPN, former colleague of mine who I used to work with here and there on different events throughout my career at ESPN, Jed Drake. Jed, thank you so much for joining me today.
My pleasure, Don. It's long overdue. I've enjoyed your podcast, and I'm glad to contribute and spend some time with you.
Thank you very much. So I just want to basically start from the beginning with you here. I know that in doing some of my research, you, like me, became a sportscaster at a local station early in your career, and then it transitioned. So where did your love of sports come from, and then why did you want to put it into media practice?
So the short story of this is that I always wanted to be in production, but at the time that I graduated from college in the prior century, there was no ESPN. There were only the three major sports entities in the U.S., ABC, CBS, and NBC Sports. And the only path to stay in sports television was to go the local route. So I followed a guy by the name of Bill Fine to a little station in Plattsburgh, New York, WPTZ. The interesting thing about PTZ, two things. One, it was Burlington, Vermont, and Plattsburgh, New York, which is sort of at the end of the universe, except that on the other side of that universe is Montreal. And so you can't count Montreal into the demographic, the ADI, for the United States. But if you could, the market that we were in as the NBC station would have been one below Dallas. So it was a tiny station with a huge market, and that's actually where most of the sales went to, is Montreal. Most of our ads were Montreal-based ads. But as a sports guy, if you look at the map, Plattsburgh is about 45 minutes from Lake Placid. And I started at WPTZ in 1978 in October, having graduated from Boston University. 2 years later, not even 2 years later, less than 2 years later, it was the Winter Olympics. So I literally went to a station as a sports guy with the Winter Olympics in my backyard. Literally in my backyard, because I'd moved to Lake Placid, and I was about a block and a half from the high school, which is where the speed skating oval was set up, and where Eric Heiden won 5 gold medals as an individual. So it was an amazing time. There are stories that we probably don't have enough time to tell, but it did involve Roone Arledge, the godfather, if you will, of all sports television in this country. I'll tell you quickly. Because we were on at 6 and 11 o'clock, the 6 and 11 o'clock newscast, and these events were happening in our market, I decided that it was fair game for me to show these events. Now, the key thing is, back in those days, the Olympics were not televised during the daytime. It was a compilation that was showed at night that Roone Arledge and his great team magically put together as this wonderful form of programming. But it turns out that as I started to show Eric Heiden's gold medal runs on the 6 o'clock news, I was beating Roone Arledge and the entire sports team by hours in terms of showing gold medals, at least in our audience. And I come to find out that they have a little black and white television in the massive control room, which was built down at the bus station in Lake Placid. And he would watch me have those highlights of Eric Heiden. So this went on, I think, for 3 gold medals. I get a call from the general manager of WPTZ, which was a Rollins company. They actually are probably better known as a pesticide inspector company. In any case, the general manager said to me, look, he goes, you're doing a great job. We have one problem. Roone Arledge called the president of Rollins Broadcast and said that if that little a-hole shows one more second of highlights, I am going to shut down the entire NBC network for all Olympic highlights for the rest of the event. And he goes, so you can't do it anymore. So I'm going to flash forward. I have told this story more. I hope it's not too long a story. 8 years later, I had, of course, left. I'd been at ESPN, and a guy who I became very good friends with and very close for many, many years, Jeff Mason, was Roone's right-hand man on the Calgary Olympics in 1988. And Jeff and I and Jamie Reynolds and a merry cast of others had just finished up the America's Cup in Fremantle in 1987. And Jeff said, you know, we could use you as a director. I had directed that event. He goes, we could use you as a director at Calgary. So there I go off to Calgary, and I direct bobsled and luge at Calgary. Flash forward to the wrap party at the end of the Calgary Olympics, and this was the end of the Olympic run for ABC Sports. And I happened to bump into Roone Arledge. And he goes, he kind of recognized me. He goes, you directed bobsled and luge. I said, yeah. He goes, good job. He goes, it was incredible that the four-man team the U.S. team lost by only 1,000th of a second, which is true. He goes, but it was great coverage. And then I said, by the way, I have to share something with you. I said, you remember back in Lake Placid when there was that sportscaster guy that was showing all those highlights of Eric Heiden? And he goes, yeah. He was beating us by hours every day. He goes, we almost shut down NBC. I said, that was me. And he paused for about 3 seconds. And he goes, oh, my God. And then he said, you know what? That was a really good job, too. And that was the end of it. So it all came around eight years later.
Well, it seems to me that you pushed the envelope. You probably didn't know what you were doing at the time or realized how significant that was, but you've pushed the envelope a lot, and we'll get into that in just a little bit. February of 1980 was the Olympics, and then you went to join ESPN in 1980 as well. You were one of the first, I would say, core group of people at ESPN. How did that happen, and where did you start?
Okay, the way it happened was a week after the Olympics was over, I was covering Saranac Lake High School basketball again, having just covered the U.S. gold medal hockey team's victory. So from one extreme to the other, no disrespect to Saranac Lake High School basketball, I said, I got to get the hell out of here. And ESPN had just come on in 79, and so my dad, who lived in Connecticut, dropped off a resume. And what I had also done to kind of help my cause, rather than just being a sports guy on a news show, I had been working for NBC Sports freelance as a statistician or a stage manager at every Major League Baseball game that they were doing in my region. And my region I defined as Toronto, Montreal, and Boston. So what I would typically do, Don, is after the 11 o'clock show on Friday night, we got off the air, 11:30, I would hop in my Jeep. I would drive 4.5 hours to Fenway, park in the parking lot there, fall asleep for about 3 hours, and then I would do either stage manager or stats for NBC Sports Game of the Week. And I was already working at an NBC station, so there was a close tie. Flash forward, Scotty Connell was one of the two architects of ESPN. He came from NBC Sports, he and Chet Simmons, president and chief operating officer. And in that resume, I happened to show that I'd been working for NBC Sports Game of the Week for all of these different games, and that lit him up. He said, okay, NBC Sports guy, got it, okay, we'll hire him. So I went from being the 6 and 11 sports guy at WPTZ to a production assistant. And I took a pay cut from $18,000 a year down to $13,500, and I was more than happy to do it because I was moving back to Connecticut, which is where I'm from, and I was actually doing production. And I was quite happy to say thank you very much to being on camera. I actually got to enjoy it after a while, but it is one of the most fearful things that you would understand, that when you first do it for real, it just scares the hell out of you.
Yeah.
But you know what? I will say this, that having gone through that, in the Malcolm Gladwell 10,000 hour approach, I think it actually helped me a great deal working with announcers after that, because I understood probably the same thing you do. I understood what it was that they were going through, and trying to be, for example, deferential with the IFB. I didn't want to be in their ear constantly while they were trying to communicate to others. And so I think it helped me in managing with talent along the way in my production career.
That was actually one of the most important things I learned from being on camera is that communication dynamic, because if they're listening to the analyst and it's an important story, you don't want to get in their ear then, even though you know you have to give them what's coming up next or where you're going next. But you learn how to be very precise. So
Yes.
I completely understand exactly what you're saying. So in the early days of ESPN as a production assistant, and then how you grew, what were some of the responsibilities? Because everything's a lot different now with digital and
Yeah.
the ease of where you can pull things from.
Well, again, I started out as a production assistant, but at ESPN in those days, if you had a pulse and you kind of knew your way around production, you moved very quickly. So in short order, I was producing shows. And, again, there was a voracious appetite for content. So some of the shows I was doing, I think the very first program that I ever did was women's field hockey at UConn. And Sam Rosen of MSG fame was the announcer. And I had not a clue what I was doing. But I forget the gentleman's name who was directing, and he basically did the show, and I just sort of learned as you went. So that would have been the first show. And then from there, I got heavily involved in boxing, believe it or not, because we were doing boxing every week, Top Rank Boxing. And so I got into boxing, and gradually I just started producing. I probably did, for 3 years, I probably did 40 boxing shows a year, mostly in Atlantic City and Vegas. And, you cut your teeth on those kinds of shows, because one of the things about boxing is it's totally unpredictable, of course. If you're doing a basketball game, you kind of have a sense of how long this thing is going to run, and when there's going to be timeouts. And with boxing, I mean, you're on your seat of your pants. I mean, you look away for a second, the fight's over, and now what are you going to do? And you learn a lot by doing that. And there were many people like me, Terry Lingner, Bobby Feller, Bruce Connell, God rest his soul, Scotty's son. And we were sort of a core group of guys that had come from different backgrounds, but we were all sort of out on the front lines producing these shows for ESPN, and it was a fabulous time. It was just, we didn't know if this was going to last. We didn't know if ESPN was going to even exist in a few years, but we were being given opportunities that you wouldn't have gotten at the networks for maybe 10 years if you were lucky, and we were getting them in 10 weeks.
What was the most fun you had in those early days, up until you until you really got the title of producer?
I think it would have been working with guys like Bill Fitz, who was the guy that hired me. Scotty was the one who sort of singled me out, but Bill Fitz was the guy that hired me, who had come from CBS Sports and other places. And I think my most fun was working with those kinds of guys and learning from them. And God knows, I mean, they had patience beyond any comprehension. In fact, I know for certain that I would not have had the patience with me if the roles were reversed. And actually, I can prove that by how I sometimes dealt with some up and coming production assistants. But just learning, Don, from people who had seen it all, who had done Super Bowls, and who were willing to let you make errors as long as you learn from them. And that was sort of a credo that was always part of ESPN, not just in production, but most certainly in technology, which I know we'll get into, but this whole notion of allowing yourselves the opportunity to fail as long as you learn from that. And if you don't learn from it, you're not going to last long. But if you do learn from it, it's an incredibly valuable lesson, almost in anything you do.
Now, I know a lot of people have their eye on the producer chair and beyond, but it's very difficult, at least in the environment that, in the last, say, 10, 15 years of my career at ESPN, there's just so many people that want to do it. What do you think makes people stand out in getting to that next level?
Absolute command of the content, which comes from an enormous amount of research and work, a willingness and an understanding of what it takes to work with people, because in the producer role, you are the leader of that team. You may have bosses like I ultimately became as, coordinating producers and VPs and all of that. But, that's one of the fascinating things about doing remote production. When you're out in the field and you're the producer, that's it. The phone may ring, but nobody's going to walk into the truck unless you're doing some major event where, there's 18,000 people around. When you're on a remote doing that event, it's your event. And you have to understand what that means to all the people who are involved in it, and you have to work with them. And they're human beings, and you're a team. I mean, that's in the end, that's what it is. You're a team, and you can't do it yourself. That's for damn sure. So it's incredibly important to understand that. It's incredibly important to have a great command of whatever event you're doing, the information. And then there is that innate ability that some people have and some don't, which is you have to be able to make decisions, and you have to trust your conviction that you're making the right decisions at every turn, because you are going to make, as a producer doing a live event, if you ever bothered to count them, you probably make thousands of decisions, some small, some huge, during the course of a show, and that's what you're paid to do, is make the right decisions. And so that's where you have to trust your gut. And some people have that, some people don't. And the unfortunate reality of that position is it'll weed you out pretty quickly.
Yeah. No, it can be stressful, but it's also very rewarding, at least for me. When you were in the early days of ESPN, and one of the reasons I became so interested in sports broadcasting, I wanted to be like Dan Patrick and Keith Olbermann. I mean, that was a great combination. Right. I know you had to have touched every single part of ESPN. What was it for people who are always curious about what talent is like working at at the worldwide leader? What can you tell them about some of these personalities and how they work, and the professionalism and the effort that goes into what they do?
Well, I think by and large, those that worked at ESPN, and again, I'm saying past tense now because it's been some time since I was there, Don, but I think the word that I would grab most quickly would be sincere and authentic. I often would be asked, what's Boomer like, Chris Berman? And I would say he is exactly the same off the air as he is on the air. A guy like Mike Tirico, who is, he's going to be in the top 3 of the greatest, most friendly people on the planet, who sincerely cares. I mean, he would on the World Cup, he would make it a point to come into the control room, whether we were in South Africa or Rio, in 2010 or 2014, he would come in and he would greet everybody when he would come in. He would come 10, 11 o'clock because he might be doing the noon match. And he would come in and like literally every day without fail, just come in. And he wasn't doing it for himself. He was doing it for us, because he knew that as that guy that is going to be the front-facing guy for this massive event, that for a graphics operator to have, a couple of sentences with Mike and have him ask questions that he was really interested in was priceless. And it matters so much. It gets back to that team thing. We learn a lot at big events, and I never stop learning. I think that's one of the things that I took away from the World Cup in 2014, that need to be that person that really cares about everybody. Honestly, I didn't do it as well at that event as I should have, and that's one of the things that bothers me to this day. But in short, those are the kinds of things from announcers that you really you seek, because people look up to them. Whether they're the most important people on the show or not, certainly they are to our audience. And you want to see that sincerity. I mean, Boomer is one of the greatest guys. We still, to this day, Boomer and I still exchange texts on Major League Baseball opening day. We started it in 1990 when we started Major League Baseball. And it was well before text. I think it was voicemails on the ESPN phone system. And he would just wish me a great opening day, and I would respond in kind. And Jay Cutler, one of our great producers, we had the same thing going. To this day it happens, except now he's in Maui, which is, unfortunately a site of incredible tragedy. But even just back to the baseball thing, he would text me. And sometimes I'd beat him because we were 5 hours ahead of him. I did text him, by the way, when I heard about the horrific situation in Lahaina, because he has a house in Maui, and he said, we're okay. He goes, words can't describe what it is like here. I feel terribly for him, obviously, and for everybody. But again, authenticity, sincerity, and then knowledge of the game. Also, I mean, if you want to talk about announcers, and one of the most important things is understanding the moment and having some dynamic to the commentary, that it cannot all be full throttle, that there's got to be some contour to it. There's a great line from God, I'm trying to remember who said it, but it's about music, and I forget which composer it was, but the line was, "It's not about the notes; it's about the silence between them," and I think that's one of the things that makes announcers as good as they can be when they understand that, and they understand that they're not bigger than the event themselves, that they are there just to document it, to chronicle it, and then to get the hell out of the way when it demands that you do so.
Well, and one of the things that I really liked about the early Sports Center was the personality that went into it. It wasn't just calling what happened or telling the audience what happened. It was throwing those phrases in there that just kind of made you laugh. And it seemed to me that ESPN had a lot of that throughout, and maybe from my perspective, that's what made it grow so significantly.
Well, there was that line that was often said about ESPN at the time, which was, "We take sports seriously, we don't take ourselves seriously," and not taking ourselves seriously means that there is an opportunity for humor, because in the end, this is just sports. It's not life and death. You remind me of one other criteria. John Walsh, who was the executive editor at ESPN, who I'm sure you remember, and legendary in this industry. He used to say to me, once I became vice president, and I would ask him questions all the time because I valued his judgment and his opinion. He would say, "Jed, when in doubt, hire intelligence." And what that means is that when you have a group of intelligent people, and they understand that they're not taking their work too seriously. Yes, they take their content seriously, what they're covering, but they're open to that kind of repartee. So guys like Dan Patrick and Oberman, I mean, two incredibly smart guys, and they figured it out. That said, at the risk of quoting a cliche, if humor was easy, everybody would do it, and there's a lot of bad humor out there. And so, if you're going to do it, be careful, because, it ain't easy, and it's hard to be consistent with it too, So, intelligence, authenticity, and we did have that vibe there. We didn't take ourselves too seriously, Don. We took our work very, very seriously, sometimes too seriously. But those that were on camera and made it work also had that sensibility that, okay, we can portray this content in perhaps a more entertaining way. And that was the hallmark of more than 20 years of SportsCenter for sure.
I also had the good fortune of being one of, I think it was 16 interns in the summer of 1994, and I was put in broadcast promotions with Paul DiPietro, Ted Avery, and a few other people that their names are escaping me right now. But I remember working on a project with Paul with the bobblehead doll commercials that for ESPN baseball promos. And it was then that it just kind of sunk into me how much fun you could have working this, and just seeing the creativity. And I think both are kind of intertwined in that regard. I know you've touched a lot of sports, but where do you feel like you've had the most impact on the sports at ESPN?
You'd probably have to ask somebody else, Don, but but I will say this. The events that I'm most proud of might well be the two World Cups that were the last two that I did and the last two that ESPN did, the 2010 World Cup in South Africa and the 2014 World Cup in Brazil. And I say that because I suppose compared to what we had done in 2006 in Germany, we had so far to come because we just didn't do it right. I thought about that event afterwards, and I was upset at myself that I didn't give we had a really good team, but we didn't give them the resources that we needed to do it right. And so after 2006, I said, you know what, we have two more World Cups to do because Fox had come in and swooped in and were taking the rights, but we had the two to do. And actually, they didn't do that until after 2010. And there was a story as to how that got done. But we said we're going to do this differently. The World Cup is the only event in this country that where it's not understood to the same level of respect and intensity and life-altering moments that it is in the rest of the world. And I said, we're going to change that. Now, John Skipper, who was executive vice president in charge of programming and production at the time, this was not a problem for him because he was a huge, I'll say, football fan, Tottenham. And when I said to him, look, we got to do this right. We have to do this for a soccer audience. And if we do it right for them, we'll increase the time spent viewing significantly. It may not be a huge audience, but we're going to get a big ratings bump because they're going to watch for a lot longer because they're going to come to understand that we understand. And we made the World Cup in 2010, well in 2009, a company priority, which is one of the hallmarks of ESPN. You remember how we would prioritize everything top 3 or 4. We made the World Cup an event. We increased the budget from $18 million to $25 million, and we did some remarkable things, and we covered the culture of South Africa, and we covered the event. We brought in the best announcers, and I said to everybody, I don't care where they're from. If they speak English, then they're going to be on our network, and if they're from England, great. If they're from wherever. So we brought in the likes of Martin Tyler and a cast of all-stars, both on the commentary side and the co-commentary side, and we just did the event incredibly well. We even did we did this music collaboration between U2 and the Soweto Gospel Choir, which would take another hour to tell you how that thing nearly didn't come off, but we did win an Emmy for it, and we also were nominated for 12 Emmys. We increased ratings by 35% over 2006, and we blew out the sales projections. I mean, it was just on every level, it was a huge home run. Fox came in and got the rights to the 2018 World Cup after that. We still had 2014 to go, and so I was able to convince Skipper off our success that we wanted to double down and do 2014 even bigger. And I said, we're going to make 2010 look like a warm-up act. And he goes, okay, let's do it. And we'd already lost the rights to Fox in 2018. By the way, we did the 2011 Women's World Cup in Germany, and we did a hell of a job with that event, too. It was a great event. Largely similar in terms of ambition, and we treated that event with the kind of respect that it deserved, and that was the right thing to do. And that was not an easy sell, but we did it right. And I was really equally pleased with that, how that came out. So all the way back, yeah, the World Cups, you can't do anything bigger than a World Cup. And when you do it right, there's nothing like it.
Well, and I remember, as part of the mission statement that the whole company had to get behind this, when you're in that position and you're receiving something, it doesn't quite click, but the underlying mission is there, so when you're producing another event, sometimes you think, well, how can I contribute somehow? And it's not always conscious, but I do know that it had an effect on how the whole company treated everything, because there was signage around, just constantly reminding you. That being said, with the amount of money that went into it, how does the executive team decide what kind of budget you're going to throw at something like this, especially when there's really no reference to maybe something that's happened before?
Well, you're going to do a number of things. You're going to look at sales projections, and there's going to be sort of a projection of what the event's going to bring in monetarily, based upon your ratings projections and all that. But look, in the end, I was known to be a bit aggressive at times, and I would just, I didn't always win, but I would say, listen, we got to do this. We're going to need the money to do it right. And one of the things also about ESPN that was really heartening, and I mean, when I say we, for about 20-something years there was a period of time where we felt that we were doing the best productions in the industry, and others can disagree, that's fine, and that we were aggressive, we were smart, we were doing things, and if we needed money to do the right things, then we're going to go ask for it, and that's what we would do. I don't know whether we'll get to the K-Zone or not, but I think I told you that story when we talked last week about going to George Bodenheimer, the president, and saying, look, this is going to be really good. It's on many levels, but it's going to cost $1 million. and that was 20 something years ago. So that wasn't an easy putt, to mix metaphors. But
Right.
but he said okay, because we were doing some really cool things, and so money wasn't it wasn't easy to get. There were always fights, but if you could make a good case, let's go.
Yeah. You've been a part of some pretty significant technology innovations at ESPN. Before we get there, I want to ask you if the date September 27th, 1998 means anything to you.
Might that have been in Baltimore? Yeah, and what you're talking about, of course, was the debut of First and 10, which, if you also note, that was September 27th. That was 3 weeks into the NFL season. That's not what we had planned to do. We didn't launch this project like 9 months before, saying this is going to be great. We're going to launch this 3 weeks into the season. I do remember we were at a big NFL press announcement with then President Steve Bornstein in New York that August, and I had to go to him before the big press event. And we were talking about the NFL, but First and 10 was going to be like a big part of it. And I had to say, Steve, it ain't ready. And he's like, if you know Steve, it would be, what the F? But there would be a great accent along with it that Al Jaffe could do better than anybody. So we had this major NFL press conference, and we said we had this great technological innovation that we're going to be launching sometime this season. And we couldn't tell them what it was because we weren't sure that it was going to work by then. It's always when you look back, okay, yeah, September 27th, that's great. But we didn't know if it was going to be September 27th, October 27th, November 27th, maybe not even this season, because it wasn't working. Ironically, next month, September of 2023, we're having the 25th, I guess you could call it anniversary, and it wasn't anything that we did, but Sportico decided to put together a panel with the three guys from Sport Vision that oversaw the project, Stan Honey, Bill Squadron, and Jerry Gettner, and me. It's going to be in New York, and we're going to just kind of relive how First and 10 came to be. But yeah, I mean, that definitely changed football coverage in America, full stop. It just changed everything. I remember Bornstein got I don't know if it was an email back then. It might have been too early for email. But he got a note from Don Ohlmeyer, another one of these legends of our industry. It said something to the effect that First and 10 was incredibly important to our industry, and it was going to be as impactful on football as were handheld cameras on the field that he had introduced when he was directing Monday Night Football. And that was from Ohlmeyer, and that meant a lot because like Roone Arledge, when they talked, you listened. So that was a great one, and to this day it's become part and parcel of every football game in America now.
There is a program that the NFL Network, I believe, produced called Amazing Technology, from Yellow Line to Skycam and Pylon Cam. Just in that sentence alone, you've been a part of two of those. So with technology, there is always a risk of not having it succeed.
Mm-hmm.
When you're putting something like that together and you just don't know the unknowns, where does your mentality have to be to stay the course?
It's a great question, because what it takes is a firm commitment that you're right. That what you think is going to be great is going to be great. But here's the big but, Don. In the end, what I think or what ESPN thinks about something doesn't matter. And I always said this to people: what matters is what the audience thinks. In other words, we can have the greatest technological system that does whatever, and if the audience doesn't like it, it doesn't. And if it doesn't help make a better production, then we've wasted a whole lot of time and a whole lot of money. And so to go into a project like First and 10, you got to have a major courage of conviction, but also sort of in the back of your head, you got to say, to your point, it may never work. And even if it does, people may not like it. And we did a little bit of elevator research. But I mean, back in the day, for anybody that can remember, I mean, putting yellow line on the field was like, you're really going to do that? There were a lot at ESPN who I won't name who didn't think it was a particularly good idea. But you have to go for it if you really think it's right, and then you work with the best people you can find, who you trust. But as I said in that program that NFL did, I mean, we were doing 1st and 10. The computing power required an entire 45-foot semi truck. Now you could do it with a laptop. It was done 4 years before the iPod, 10 years before the iPhone, first one. So when you think about where computing power was, we were, as Stan Honey, the remarkable person who in essence came up with how this could be done from a technical standpoint. It's mind-boggling that we actually even tried it. Now, they had done the glowing puck the year before, and so they had done a lot of the work that was needed, but it was a completely different thing because, the odd thing about it is it looks like a line that's painted on the field, right? I mean, that's what everybody sees. What they don't see are these camera heads that are moving around in all different directions, pan, tilt, and zoom. And when you actually look at 1st and 10, all it is a yellow line over a black background that's keyed over those whatever camera is on the air at that time. So if the camera is panning and you're seeing the like a running back who maybe fumbled, now he's picked up the ball and he's running left to right, and the camera's doing this, what you'd see on 1st and 10 is just this yellow line on the right angle to the field, just moving across the screen like that, and that's all you see. The trick is to get those things synced up in perfect symmetry. And we didn't do a very good job at it for a long time. In fact, back to those dates, we had what we thought was a dress rehearsal game in Kansas City, our last preseason game, and Stan and I walked out of the truck, and the line was like doing this. It was like jittering, and it wasn't on the. It was maddening to look at, and we came outside the truck, and it's one of those moments that he and I remember. And I just said, Stan, it's not ready. And I said, I'm going to get holy hell for this, but I can't put this on the air now, and we're not going to put it on the air until it's right. And he goes, I understand. And God love him. He and his merry band of engineers figured out what was wrong, and 3 weeks after the start of the season, we finally aired it.
Mike Patrick was in the play-by-play chair on Sunday Night Football, and he said, and you can see this on that video that the NFL produced. It's on YouTube. There should be a link on your screen. ESPN unveils its latest technological innovation on tonight's game. It's ESPN's 1st and 10. The gold-colored line you'll see appears to be painted on the field, but it's really being electronically generated by us, ESPN's 1st and 10.
We think you're going to like it.
What was your emotion? What was your state of mind? Did you?
Yeah.
What was your state of mind? Let's say the hour before going on the air with that, and then once you got through and saw it working.
Well, abject horror before. I mean, I knew it was going to work, and it was going to work well enough that we could air it. And, unless something really crashed, which could always happen, because we were so far out on the bleeding edge. So abject horror, and then relief, and then to the point that I made earlier, God, I hope they like this. Because we didn't know. I mean, that was before social media. I think I told you, I don't know, flash forward 20 years, and I was doing the virtual 3-line on the NBA with Tim Corrigan. And we would light up the 3-point line, and I could instantly see what social media was saying in the truck, and I would just, like 3-point line, and I would say it was about 80%. What the hell are they doing? It was not a good response. But back with 1st and 10, we had no immediate feedback from anybody. I mean, the phone rang a couple of times, but the phone rang from people who know what they were going to see, because they, you don't get random callers from people in a truck. So, and by the way, Howard Katz deserves a great amount of credit for this, because his name is not often attached to this. But look, he and I were in the meeting together at what was then the ABC offices. I guess they're still there on West 66th Street. We were up in one of those conference rooms up on the 24th or 25th floor when we met with Bill and Jerry and Stan. And we thought that they were coming to us like on the first knock to do this. Turns out they had already peddled this thing to everybody else. NBC, CBS, Fox, and everybody else said, no, thank you. So we were like the last shot. We took the meeting, Howard and I, and they laid out what they wanted to do. And Howard said, "What do you think?" And I said, "I think we ought to go for it." I mean, the reality of it was what they were pitching was something that didn't exist. It hadn't been built yet. They had some of the technology from the glowing puck, but they didn't have this for football. So we had to, not only did we have to say yes, but we had to write another check for $1 million to fund their development. For that, we did get exclusivity for a year. And by the way, right at the end of doing the contract, I said, we said the regular season, I want to include the playoffs and the Super Bowl. And we did. Bill Squadron signed that contract, then president of Sport Vision. There is a story about that Super Bowl that year, which was a Fox Super Bowl in Miami. And it came back to me through Bill that David Hill, who is, I consider him to be a great friend. I worked with him first in 1987 in Australia doing the America's Cup. Anyway, that he wanted the Sport Vision First and 10 line, ESPN First and 10 line, for the Super Bowl. And I ran that by Bornstein, and apparently that went all the way up the chain to the head of the Walt Disney Company, who at the time was Michael Eisner. And I don't know the exact story, whether it was something that Eisner and Murdoch or whatever. By the way, we were offered $100,000, which was not insignificant at the time, to release the exclusivity for that Super Bowl, and it got turned down, and they said no. You can't have it. And so to this day, if you go back and look at that Super Bowl, whatever year, so I guess it would have been 98, there is no First and 10 on it. And that would have been the last Super Bowl without it. But yeah, they wanted it, and the higher-ups at the Walt Disney Company decided that we would just pass on that request. So there you go.
You mentioned it earlier, because of the success of that, it gave you street cred, and that put in your brain another innovation that affected baseball and continues to do so today. I remember first seeing it, kind of questioning it. I was in that camp. Like, I don't know if this is going to work, but within the first, I would say, month, I saw the value in it. So explain what that innovation was and how you got that off the ground.
So what you're talking about, of course, is the K-Zone, which is a name I came up for because it was 2 syllables and simple. So I had been in charge of baseball's coverage at ESPN since its inception. We got the contract in 1989. It was a 4-year contract for the incredible, huge amount of $400 million for 4 years, which today would buy a couple of games. So we had to start working on baseball right then. So I was in charge of baseball. I've always been a baseball fan, season ticket holder at Fenway. And I've always wanted to do the strike zone because, again, like First and 10, what you're doing is you're showing something that exists, but yet you can't see it, right? There is a first down line. You just can't see it. There is a strike zone. You just can't see it. I wanted to see it. So I went to the same guys at Sport Vision, and I called up Bill, and I said, I have another sport I want to do with potentially a similar impact. And he said, okay, come down and meet us in New York. So I did. I said, you're going to have to sign an NDA, non-disclosure agreement, which they did. And we all sat down. They said, okay, what do you want to do? And they were all excited. What sports is going to be? It's going to be cool. I said, it's baseball, and we're doing the strike zone. Oh, we were going to do that. Sorry. Too late. Here's the NDA, our idea. And this one was my idea. I didn't have by the way, just for clarity, I didn't have the idea for First and 10. That was their idea. I just, was able to help put the team together from our side and do it. K-Zone was my idea, and we went down the same path. But the big difference was initially we had to make a deal with Major League Baseball. Paul Beeston, who was the chief operating officer, and Sandy Alderson, who at the time was his right-hand person. And we had a meeting with them, and he said, look, he goes, if you do this live, we're going to lose the umpires. They're going to go, like, they just may walk. So he goes, you can only do this in replay, and you have to characterize it in a similar fashion that you do First and 10, which is it's a guide. And there is a tape. I've heard it. Phil Orleans, I think, still has it, of when we launched K-Zone in 2001. It was at Angel Stadium at the time, or L.A. Angels of Anaheim. And John Miller had to do the same kind of speech that Mike Patrick did, which of course I wrote. And it's like, and I'm not sure they were that John and Joe were that psyched about it, because it's like, well, this is pretty different, and baseball is even more ingrained in its own, or at the time in its own sort of very slow change and
traditions. Yep.
Yeah, of course. So we agreed. Oh, it's only going to be on replay. Great, and we did it. But again, because we had funded the project, I was able to negotiate perpetual exclusivity. As long as we kept renewing our contract, Sportvision could not sell it off to anybody else. A, we had funded it, and B, we had a co-patent on it. And so ESPN had it for a long, long time. Eventually, Sportvision was sold. SMT bought it. Major League Baseball was coming along with BAMTech, and we basically got out of the exclusivity business. And that's when it became, and along the way, Phil Orleans, of course, had taken it live eventually, like 10 years or whatever it was, 15 years after we launched it, and much to the credit to him. And we released the exclusivity, and then in a relatively short period of time, it became sort of ubiquitous. To your point, it's now like first and 10. I mean, I don't know of a Major League Baseball game where you don't see the strike zone. But we slowed that down by a long, long time by our exclusivity, because it was always one of the things, Don, you and I talked about that I felt was important, which was brand distinction. And our distinction in some small measure would come from technology that we had grown and developed ourselves that nobody else had. And I felt that was important to ESPN, that we were doing cooler things. Whether people bought into that, I don't know. George Bodenheimer did, our president, because when I went to sell him on K-Zone, I said, look, George, this was your street cred you were talking about. I have another idea. We were at the offsite in Greenwich one year, he goes, what do you want to do? George is always very understated. He goes, well, what do you want to do? And I said, well, I want to do a virtual strike zone. And I said, when we do it, we're going to do three things. We're going to win an Emmy. We're going to give ESPN great brand distinction by having something that nobody else has. And then when that's all said and done, we'll sell it and put a graphic on it. We'll pay for the damn thing. And he goes, well, what do you think the development's going to cost? And I said, over $1 million, maybe $1.5 million when we're all said and done. And he looked at me and goes, sounds like a good idea. Let's do it. So back to your question about money. Well, there you go. Of course, we had done first and 10, so there was a little bit of, trust us here. And fortunately, they did. And because it became, as important to baseball as first and 10 became to football.
Here's a look at the Sunday Night Baseball crew from approximately 2003. When I started ESPN, I was in Building 5, which was one of the older buildings, to my understanding. The Digital Center 1 was being built, and then eventually Digital Center 2. But going back just a little bit, and the technology, would you say the success of First and 10 and then K-Zone kind of spawned a new industry within ESPN with the technology group? And if so, how did that happen?
Well, it's an interesting question, a tough question, because these projects that we were doing were really production ideas that had a technology base to them. What guys that Chuck Pagano, is the great architect for everything that became ESPN technologically, he had his own vision for what was going on. I certainly think that it was a very positive thing to do things like First and 10 and K-Zone, just for the company. But at the same time, guys like Chuck and his team of great people were seeing the future 5-10 years down the road. One of the great things about those digital centers that they were trying to achieve is future-proof them, which, pardon me, is just about impossible to do in a technological world. But they were thinking very far ahead. And so, I don't know if we provided inspiration for them, Don. We may have. But I think it was sort of like a symbiotic relationship. We saw what they were doing in sort of this massive, like, they're going to change the world at ESPN with these massive digital centers. And we're out here sort of on the hip doing these like really cool things on the remote side. again, with a great group of operations and technical people on the remote side. So, yeah, I guess it would be fair to say that we were spinning each other up, kind of with a nod, on the other lane, like you keep going there, I'll keep going here, and we'll just keep racing down this highway doing really cool stuff.
I had a conversation with Mark Rowley, who is in your group on the technology side, former producer as well as at ESPN. You developed the camera technology to make Pylon Cams actually function in an easier fashion. The process of building that, I mean, you had a few objections, of course. You want to make sure the players were safe. You want to make sure that you could get signal. If you can, talk a little bit about the process for that and how it actually became something that is part of what you're doing now.
Got it. So again, first credit to Ed Placey for coming up with the idea, and then he went to Rowley, and Rowley is Eddie's nickname has always been Inspector Gadget, and Rowley is sort of like the mad scientist in a good way. And they were scheming, and I kind of came into it after I left oversight of remote. I was just doing production innovation for my last 2 years at ESPN, and I kind of just morphed over into this. So the two things that you mentioned are the most important things: A, safety, and B, getting a signal out of the damn thing. And again, like with with Major League Baseball and getting something approved like 1st and 10, we had to absolutely go to the NFL and say, okay, here's what we intend to do, here's what we're building, will you approve it? And there were many meetings and many levels because, to your point, what we had to do was to demonstrate that we could take this pylon that was literally on the field of play, create a camera system and mold it inside. And if a player hit that pylon, we had to convince ourselves and the league that nobody would get hurt in that process. And it took a lot of time and effort. We had to do a lot of testing we did down at the Innovation Lab. Chip Dean was with us on that. And we convinced ourselves and we convinced the league that could be done. But, it was micro cameras and again, we had 4 cameras in these things, not one. So you had these wires going up, you had electricity going up, and Blake Jones, who's a good friend, he's senior director of broadcast at the NFL. He reminds us in that video that you talked about where one of our first designs was this metal plate that the thing was going to sit on with a magnet. And so what would happen is that, theoretically the player would come in and just knock it clear and everything would be fine, except for, you kind of forget the fact that leaves a metal plate on the ground and a metal plate on the thing. So if he hits sideways or jams his finger into it or, God forbid, something else, there could be a real injury. So we scrapped that and we went with these 4 little wires that were connected by these little brass fittings. And so we finally figured out, and we tested it, that if a player ran into it, these things just snap right out, and they're just like these little tiny leads. And then somebody could come back in and reconnect them and put the pylon back down in a matter of 30 seconds. And that's how we succeeded. And not to the degree of like 1st and 10 by any means, because look, the reality of those things is you're never going to take them alive. It's feast or famine. Sometimes you'll get an amazing shot, but if you don't, then you're no worse for wear. You haven't screwed up a telecast. So, if you got a great shot, terrific. So it didn't have that sort of like no turning back now sinners of 1st and 10, because even K-Zone was replay, right? And so as long as you live in a replay lane, you can still control everything. 1st and 10, you obviously can't control everything. And once you put it on the air, there is no turning back now.
So you've talked about Ed Placey so far on this podcast, who also was a producer at ESPN. You told me a story when we talked prior to this podcast that he approached you with the idea of adding a blue line to the scrimmage line using the 1st and 10 technology. That eventually happened. How important is it for people who are looking to make an impact to share these ideas? Because I know a lot of people may have those thoughts, but they never go anywhere because they're either afraid to reach out and share them because it might be, it's a terrible idea, or they might push too hard for something that just or realistically may not work. Can you talk about how what you appreciated from the staff that reported to you when they brought you ideas?
Sure. I mean, I think one of the most important things, Don, at the level where I ran for a long time, overseeing the department, is that I sincerely believe we had a great working relationship with those that reported to me, guys like Eddie, who at the time was producing Thursday Night Football. And I guess the bottom line is that I don't think anybody in my shop would have any qualms about telling me exactly what they thought, and even if that was directly opposite what I thought. So whether it was Freddie Godelli or Rich Feinberg or Tim Scanlon or Eddie or any of them, they would always feel free to speak their minds. I mean, Jamie Reynolds, God, I mean, we used to get in these conversations that would go on for hours and just debate certain points. I'm not sure whether we did it for sport or whether we actually got anywhere, but we would go for a long, long time. So Eddie would listen. I mean, as I said, his name is Inspector Gadget, and he just came to me and he just threw it out there. He goes, "Hey, I want to try this." And he goes, "What do you think?" And I thought about it, and the other side of this is that nobody can have all the good ideas. I mean, if that's being part of a team, it's accepting the notion that other people have really good ideas, and presumably a lot more of them if you're willing to let your entire team have that opportunity to do something cool. So he said, "Hey, I want to do the line of scrimmage." And I thought about it for a while. I said, "All right, I'll make you a deal. You do it on your show." And he did. And he was right. I mean, it's as simple as that. It's not science. I mean, that's one of the funny things about it, Don. These technical things are technical in nature because they've never been done before. But really they're production elements. I'm not I mean, I couldn't spell algorithm if you gave me $100 right now. But they're production tools. And so, the production people fortunately work with great engineers and technicians and savants in that realm. And, so we just had the luxury of coming up with good ideas and then trying to figure out who the hell is going to actually make them work. And, Eddie and I had a long history of that. I mean, Eddie and I have, even after leaving ESPN on different projects, he continued on in that realm at ESPN, and we worked on any number of projects. And he will make you crazy in a good way, because he is really, really demanding. He's really good at asking what if, and he will ask it perpetually. And it's one thing when you're his boss. It's another thing when he's a client. Because when he was a boss, I could say enough. When he's a client of a company that you're working for, you have, okay, Ed, yep, I'm with you on that. Okay, let's keep going. But in the end, it's all about repartee and respect for each other. And if people have good ideas, then you're a fool not to at least hear them out and see what might come of them.
Yeah, you mentioned, of course, leaving ESPN. You started Jed Drake Associates. Mm-hmm. What is your company about?
It's about trying not to work as hard as I used to, for starters. I used to have this description of ESPN, for all the magical things that it is and was. I used to say to people that running remote production should have term limits. That you shouldn't do it forever, because it will grind you into the ground. It will, like a black hole, suck as much of your life out of you as you're willing to let it. And I ran remote production solely for 14 years, and then with Norby formed a triad with me, Mark Gross, and Marcia Keegan, and we ran it for another 4 years. And then my last 2 years, I just did innovation stuff. Doing what I'm doing now is focusing on technology that can enhance productions in sports primarily, and working with those those companies that have a great vision and they just need some help getting across the finish line. The company that I've been working with primarily is a company called C360 out of Wexford, Pennsylvania, just outside of Pittsburgh. And we're doing some remarkable work that is really taken off, and so has C360. I say we now. I normally use we for ESPN, but it's funny how it's starting to shift to C360 now after many years. We are doing some remarkable work that is now accelerating at an even more rapid pace as a result of a company called Cosm, which has acquired C360. So, like the Walt Disney Company acquired ESPN, Cosm has acquired C360, and both entities are doing great collaborative work together. Cosm has this massive vision for this shared reality of immersive experience in these large facilities that are being built in various cities. They have a huge facility that's going to be their showcase that's going up in Los Angeles on the property that was Hollywood Park. They have another one going up in Dallas that's going to open in 2024 as well. There's a showcase in Salt Lake City that was like all the rage at the NBA All-Star game. And people go in and they see these experiences and they're like, oh my God, it's this 8K immersion of this massive screen where you're basically enveloped. The difference is that you're there with all your friends and your family or whomever you want to be with, and you're sharing this experience together. It would be like if you're sitting at center court at Wimbledon or center court at an NBA Finals. I mean, it's that sort of immersive experience that really is it's really changing. It is going to change the way that people see sports because, look, there's only so many people that can sit in an NBA Finals or a Wimbledon Finals. This gives you a visceral experience that may in many respects be equal to that. You just don't have to be in London or Wimbledon or wherever the NBA Finals are. So I'll say we, Cosm, have deals in place with the NBA, with UFC. There's many more conversations ongoing with other leagues and entities. And C360 has a really nice space because we're creating new ways to mine content and to bring that content, whether it's to broadcasters on one side of the fence or directly to Cosm on the other side. And it's a really fascinating place to be. And the good news is everybody has this same sort of, it reminds me a lot of ESPN in those days when I talked about where, there's like 20 years where we were just racing down the highway and we could do no wrong. And Jed Terry, who's the CEO of Cosm, and Evan Weimer, who's the co-founder, I mean, they both have these great visions. Jeb is a former offensive lineman in the NFL. He played with the 49ers and in Tampa. He's a quite an imposing figure, and I don't say just because of his physical size. He is a force of nature, and when you see him and hear him talk about the kinds of things that Cosm is doing, you're a believer. And I'm really pleased that I'm working with these folks, A, on the broadcast side and content side, but B, also for what else they're doing, because it's really fascinating to me to, because my life has been broadcast, right? It's been a 16 by, or, a 4x3, 16 by 9, whatever size screen you want. And now it's like this whole thing that just blows your mind. So it's an exciting time, and I'm enjoying it and trying not to work too hard at the same time, because, life is, I don't want it to completely pass me by and get sucked down that black hole.
You have too many Red Sox games you need to experience still, right?
Yeah, actually, I was at Fenway a couple of nights ago for the Morgan Wallen concert. That was a different experience too. But no, it's all good.
Yeah. So some of the products that C360 has in their stables, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it's the Pylon Cam, but enhanced as one of them.
Well, yeah.
Can you speak on any
right?
of those?
I mean, the Pylon is. Yeah. I mean, the Pylon is just one application of the core technology. I mean, basically, what we have the ability to do is to shoot this 360-degree image, but then we're able to go inside that image. So we shoot it like, if you count the number of pixels, we're like 12K. So you have this massive amount of pixels, and then what you're able to do instantly is to go into that image and shoot whatever 16 by 9 frame you want. So if you think for a moment of a camera in the line to gain Pylon, which is, our systems are now being used by Fox and CBS and ESPN, all on NFL and college this fall. On on the line to gain, if you're looking straight down the line, we're not just seeing this 16 by 9, which might be, I don't know, maybe 10 yards. We're actually seeing like 30 yards. And so if something happens over here, like if I was shooting over here, I would be able to see this and just zoom into that and make that a full replay, or over here or over here. So when you're on a football field, that matters, because, or any field of play of any sporting event, because there are things that are going to happen outside the normal framing of 16 by 9 that may become incredibly important. And these conversations are the ones that have led to, both with the leagues and with the rights holders, that understand the value of having that kind of opportunity to capture everything. Because, as Freddie Godelli would tell you, when I remember a quote from him when he was asked about the 8th Super Bowl that he had done, and he said, what is the most important thing for him? And he said, make sure that we have the all-telling replays on the most critical plays in the game. In other words, you can't miss anything. And what we do is we provide a great safety net for those broadcasts by having that ability to see far more than a normal broadcast camera can, and then being able to go back and capture that. So again, the line to gains, or the pylons on the goal line, they're just one applications of this technology, which is being used on many sports. We have a pilot program with the NHL, because one of the things, in addition to what these cameras do, Don, is that they're able to be run by data. And by the way, these cameras don't move. I mean, that's the incredible part of it. So if you put this camera here, it's seeing all this, and it's pan tilting and zooming in live and in replay, which is key. The camera itself doesn't move. It's all done algorithmically. I use that word again. And it all happens within the servers. It's all server-based. So wherever you have these cameras, if you have them on the blue lines or behind the goals, they are all seeing all these different images. And again, here's one of the fascinating things that we're working with on the leagues. They can be driven by data. So that means, for example, the National Hockey League uses SMT to track every player and the puck in every game. We're able to take that data and drive our camera systems. So and we have the whole CX Video Hub, as we call it, where the individual end user can go in, dial up any player that they want, live and in replay, and see whatever they want. And all of that material gets pushed up to the cloud, and you can, an infinite number of people can use it for whatever purpose you want. But you've got discrete video of every player that you could either do live, or you could go back as these now databases are going to become more and more as they proliferate. You could go back and say, okay, so for the last 2 years, I want to see Brad Marchand's power play goals. And when you start, it may be this really wide image. You hit a button, bang, you're on him. Where does that help live? Think about this for a second. It's an example that I've used time and again. But as gaming, otherwise known as betting, becomes much more of an important part of this culture, look no further than ESPN Bet, by the way, last week, $2 billion. If, for example, you're watching a hockey game and the Bruins go on a power play, and up comes a screen on a computer that you're watching. Here's program over here, but now the screen says, okay, here are the odds for power play goals by these players. Brad Marchand, 3-1 odds, $5, click, boom. Now all of a sudden you've got him full frame on the left side, game on the right side, and you can follow him for the entire time. Because why? Because you've just spent money and you're hoping he scores a power play, and you want to watch him every single second of that because he's got your money. So that kind of application, and whether it's gaming or for any other application, whether it's audio follow for anybody that's mic'd, where you're shooting the wide game, but all of a sudden somebody says something and it's like, oh, wait a minute, do we have a camera on him? No, you didn't. Oh, we have C360, no problem. 12 white, click, got him dead to rights. That ability to have that discrete video is one of the things that we do. You can't do it without our camera systems. We can take the data from anywhere, and when you put them together, it's pretty powerful. I often say there's an old General Electric ad, old because I remember it. We bring good things to life. What we do is we bring data to life. We create visuals that are driven by the data, and nobody else can do it the way that we do it. The ability to shoot wide and then go into all of this individual content. it's extraordinary, and it's one of the things that we do, and it's one of the things that sort of drives me to this day, because it's at a whole new layer of development for broadcast, and then for all the other uses where people will take this and go places with it.
On a broader scale, where do you see broadcast television going, say in the next, I would say 10 years, but things are moving so fast, say the next 5 years?
Yeah, I mean, this is a question that people like Adam Silver get asked, and he's a lot smarter than me, and he's paid a lot more money. But what he said was that things are going to look a lot different than they do now. I do think that there's going to always be the opportunity for major sporting events to be seen by audiences. I think it was Skipper that said at some point, the Super Bowl is going to be on pay-per-view. Maybe not. Maybe legislation at the national level actually prevents that. We'll see. But again, I think the big events are always going to be available. How you get them is going to change. I mean, it is all going digitally. You look at what ESPN and Disney are talking about in terms of what they have to do. I mean, when I was there, when we finished up the World Cup in 2014, we had 101 million subs paying what they will or what they did, and that's down 25 million, and that's a ton of money. And look, I mean, I'm backtracking to where Bob Iger and Jimmy Pitaro and the folks that he's bringing in to look at this, because they know that the future is digital, and they're trying to figure out how to get there, so that they don't cut themselves off too quickly from cable, where they're still, the bad news is they're down from 101. The good news is there's still 75 million that are paying for ESPN on cable. So, they don't want to dismiss those, and that is as I've read from quotes that Bob Iger has said that that business is going to be there for a long, long time, maybe forever, who knows. But the digital side of it is where this is going to land. The question is, how are entities going to monetize it to the extent that they can pay for these rights fees that are only going up? And one of the things that's been kicked around, again, I'm not breaking any news here, but I mean, if there's plenty to read these days, and one of the things you're reading about Disney, which, as Steve Bornstein, former president, said, Disney is probably the best position to make this change to digital for a lot of reasons, one of which is intelligence. But it is going to end up in digital. How do you monetize it? And that's going to be the key. One of the things that may happen, to the point I was going to make, is, who knows, they may end up, they're looking for a strategic partner for ESPN. That partner may well be a league. Maybe it's the NBA, where in the next big mega rights deal, there's a bit of a deal to be made for rights for the NBA that includes maybe a write down because they now own a piece of ESPN. Wouldn't that be an interesting way to mitigate some of those rights costs? Who knows? People a lot smarter than me, Don, are having those conversations right now, and who knows where they end up. But I mean, it kind of makes sense when you think about it.
Yeah, no, it's definitely interesting. I have no idea where it's going to go. Of course, not many people do, but it's really interesting hearing all the possibilities. So, but I think you provide some great insight into some of that, some of those possibilities.
Well, I will say, I will just say this, that, getting back to what C360 does, and this individualism, individual opportunities for the end user to have that experience, I do think that that's going to become, without question, part of whatever digital experience people choose to have. Because I think there's going to be content that will be valuable based upon the tracking, that will be in real time, that people will find value. And I'm not just talking to people that are going to put prop bets on these things. I'm just talking about anybody that finds information valuable that will augment the normal broadcast, so that personalized experience is one that is going to become certainly part of the fabric of wherever broadcasting digital content distribution goes. So in one sense, I guess you could posit that in some cases where we go with C360 is going to individualize that experience, and yet on the other side of the spectrum with Cosm, it's going to bring everybody into the house and have this shared experience that is going to be equally emotional. I often talk about sports as sort of entertainment. And one of the great things about it is you don't know the outcome. It is live. You have a sincere interest in the outcome of the event. And so, wherever you go, however you consume sports, it is one of the most powerful forms of entertainment that we have. And it ain't changing, it's gonna be around and gonna keep morphing. But the passion for sports is something that you just can't replace anyplace else in entertainment.
Data by itself is just a bunch of numbers, but when you package it with a story, you have something that's influential and powerful. And that's where I think my next question for you is, and it's on a little bit of a lighter note. What is your favorite sports movie?
Wow. Clearly you didn't prep me on these questions, Don.
Spontaneity is best.
Yeah, I suppose Field of Dreams. Yeah, it's because again, I'm a real baseball purist, and so I'll go with Field of Dreams. And I wish I'd been out there for the productions that Fox did because they were fabulous. But I've never been, so I suppose that'll end up on the bucket list one of these days.
Yeah. And then to wrap it up here, what sports memento, credential, artifact, something that you've gotten from an event that you've worked on is the most special to you?
I don't have the exact one from the event, unfortunately. I have my press pass from USA, Czechoslovakia. I think we won 4-2 that. Was it 4-2 or 4-4 at USA Hockey? I became quite close to Herb Brooks and the USA Hockey team when I was back all the way back to Plattsburgh, because they would come in to train at the then brand new Lake Placid ice facility. And furthermore, I'd been at BU, and 4 of the players on that U.S. hockey team were BU players: Ruzioni, O'Callahan, Silk, and Craig. And so I got to know them quite well. So I was actually at the USSR game. I was at all of the USA games. I don't know where the credential went to USA, USSR, but I have the one from USA, Czechoslovakia. And yeah, I mean, I was up in the rafters. I remember I had no idea what Al Michaels was saying as they were recording that. It wasn't live, you might remember. The game was at 5:30. It didn't air till 8. I was up in the rafters with Bob Kramer, our camera guy, and we were shooting, again, back to the ABC thing. We were, shooting video where we weren't supposed to be shooting video. Shh. It was only 40-something years ago. As the clock counted down from 10, I nudged Bob gently as he was shooting, and I whispered, I said, you will remember this moment for the rest of your life. And, and then they beat Russia, and then they went on to win the gold. So that one credential would be the one.
Yeah. Okay, I lied. I have one more question. What kind of advice would you have for someone who is relatively new in this industry on how to make the most of sports broadcasting?
Now, I suppose it gets back to what we talked about. What's important. Understand that it's not an easy job. It requires large amounts of time, large amounts of effort. Be a team player. Know what you're good at, and because there's a whole different realms of things that you can do in broadcast. We don't even want to call it broadcast anymore. Content creation. Some of it may be live, some not. If you want to be live, then you've got to understand what it takes in terms of that ability to make rapid decisions with a courage of conviction and a sense that what you're going to decide upon is going to be right, and you're going to impact a lot of things with those decisions. If you're game for it, there's nothing like it. To this day, I just love the environment of being in remote trucks, even though there's fewer of them out there because there's so many Remys. But when you are there, there is something that is magical about being on the edge, where decisions will be made constantly, where there's an intensity, And then at the end, there's a feeling of that you've done something well and you've done something right. And when you walk out of the truck, it's like, okay, we did a good one. We did what we were supposed to for our audience. We worked hard together. And in the end, they got to see what they wanted to see, and we're on to the next, and just keep it going and going and going and going.
Well, I just want to wrap this up by saying I had the privilege of sitting in on many of the executive meetings while at my time at ESPN, because being a part of ESPN International, we didn't have enough people to cover certain positions. So I was in a lot of executive meetings with you and all the other people that you mentioned, and I just absorbed like a sponge all that information, and it carried me through to my next career with Universal Sports Network and NBC. So whether you realized it or not, I learned a ton from you then, and just listening to you today on this podcast, I learned a ton more. So I appreciate your time. Thank you for coming on, and I wish you the best of luck in your career going forward.
Well, thank you, Don. It's been a great pleasure, and I appreciate what you're doing for the industry. As you say, I learned from a lot of great people, and I'm pleased to hear that you took some of what I learned and learned from that and pass it on, because that's what this industry is about. Sharing your knowledge with everybody, and then along the way finding people who figure out a way to do it better. And hopefully those in the next generations to come will keep it going. I suspect they will.
In a much different capacity, but yes, I agree with you.
Fair enough.
It's really cool to be able to talk with Jed about how he was able to make incredible advancements in sports broadcasting using technology. Hearing the backstories is part of what this podcast is about, to capture what went into making things happen from the inside, who had a part in it, and how it affects the viewer at home. I get to spend another couple of hours talking shop with Jed, and I truly appreciate his time, so I hope you enjoyed our conversation. Again, if you're listening and want to see some of the visuals included in this episode, check out @SportsMaking on YouTube. If you like Sports in the Making, be sure to subscribe on your preferred podcast listening platform. And if there's someone who works in the sports industry that you'd like to hear from, drop a comment on YouTube or on the Facebook page. Also, be sure to like, share, and review. Thank you for spending time with me on Sports in the Making. I'm your host, Don Cardona.